Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Um, we are excited to present an immigration law mini-series and overview. This is brought to you by Colorado Refugee Connect, and it will be a three-part series with a number of nonprofit providers as our presenters. So today we're going to cover Where's the Line for Immigration, which is a broad strokes overview of pathways and vocabulary that relate to immigration. And then next week, we'll go into humanitarian pathways, human migration, and try to answer the question, why don't they just come legally? So how are people entering this country? What is their legal status and what implications does it have for them? And then on May 6th, we will cover how can I sponsor my family member? That will look at various forms of reunification for refugees and then for other immigrants. We're excited to have you guys all join us. We know that there has been a lot of immigration and various people groups coming to the state of Colorado, and the refugee service providers field a lot of questions about the various populations coming, what their statuses are, what their pathway to permanent residency and citizenship is. And our hope is that today will give sort of the average Coloradan and immigrant and refugee service providers a better understanding of how the current immigration landscape looks. So today we're talking about immigration pathways and vocabulary. So a lot of the key terms that we will use throughout the series have very specific legal definitions. And so our attorneys today are going to cover that. They're going to kind of lay a foundation for the subsequent sessions. And at the end of each of the webinar series, we will have a Q&A. So please, if you have questions today, put them in the Q&A, and then we will answer some as we go, and then we will answer the other in the last few minutes of this presentation. It is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be sent out in a follow-up email, along with a number of resources for the organizations presenting today, as well as other American Immigration Lawyer Association attorneys, so that you have at your fingertips a resource that you can use as a mechanism for referral for immigrants and refugees that are seeking legal services. Today, I'm excited to introduce three of our local service provider attorneys. Tracy Harper is the Afghan Program Managing Attorney with the Immigration Legal Services Department at Catholic Charities of Denver. Wesley Brockway is the Legal Services Director for the International Rescue Committee in Denver, which is one of the local resettlement agencies. And then Nick is our managing attorney. He has his own law practice, but he works for, or he contracts quite a bit with Muslim Youth for Positive Impact. So I'm going to pass it over to Tracy Harper, and she's going to just talk about kind of additional purposes for this presentation.
Hey everybody, I am going to start us off with a couple of disclaimers. First one is our disclaimer for all of you service providers out there. I just want to remind you that this is all for informational purposes only. We are not turning you into lawyers or legal practitioners today. So nothing in here is designed to make you an expert in immigration law. Nothing should make you qualified to tell your family, friends, or clients anything about what kind of immigration pathways they are eligible for or that they qualify for. And nothing should make you qualified to help your family, friends, or clients prepare any applications to submit to any immigration authorities. I'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of the presentation, but only licensed attorneys and Department of Justice accredited representatives are allowed to advise or assist with immigration issues and applications related to immigration law. Next slide, Mary. And then if we have any of our immigrant community out there, whether you're also a service provider or you're here looking for information about your case, I just want to remind you that today is for informational purposes. We are not here to give legal advice. This information is not supposed to help you fill out your applications for any immigration benefits that you're looking for. And if you're looking for case-specific answers and those questions are put into the chat, we will not be answering those today. However, as Mary said at the beginning, we'll be sharing resources for people to contact immigration lawyers and nonprofit organizations practicing immigration law, and they should be able to help you in an office setting. And then I'm just going to give you guys an overview of what we're going to cover today, and then we'll move on to our presenters. So today we're going to start with talking about the acronyms and the vocabulary that you need to understand immigration in the US. This is a very large category, and we are not covering everything, but we're hoping that you'll have enough information and have the understanding for the words that we use in order to make decisions on behalf of your clients. After that, we're going to be talking about the different terms used to describe new immigrants in the US and Colorado. And then what and where is immigration law? Where does immigration law come from? Who's in charge of executing these laws? And where are the different pathways that they come from? And then the main immigration pathways for the immigrants that we work with here in Colorado, we'll give you an overview on the different ways that people come to the United States and stay in the United States. And then we'll wrap it up with talking about who is authorized to give legal advice and to provide legal services in Colorado specifically. Now we'll move on to Wes to talk to you guys about all this lovely vocabulary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wes Brockway. I'm Legal Services Director at the IRC here in Denver. And yeah, over the next couple slides, I'm going to try and go over some vocabulary for sure and some specific definitions, but really just to begin by laying out maybe a few concepts that I think are helpful to understand how the immigration system works. Obviously, immigration is not something that everyone's going to interact with on a daily basis. And it is, I would say, unfortunately, a very complicated area of the law, even for those of us who do interact with it every day and practice in this area. So this is, yeah, just designed to be foundational and to clarify, a little bit also, I think, the human perspective of folks who are coming to the United States in hopes of staying here temporarily or permanently. So here's kind of a very general list of the things that the immigration law regulates. This is done by varying sources of law, regulations, court decisions, as well as agency memos and guidance, all stuff that Nick will explain in a little bit. But essentially, it all adds up to this large system, right? That regulates these things. Who can enter the United States, for how long they can stay, and for what purposes. Who can work in the United States, who can become a U.S. citizen, right? Who has that pathway to U.S. citizenship, and then also what are the steps and requirements that they have to take along the way, and then ultimately who's ineligible to stay in the United States, who will be determined by this immigration system that they need to be deported or removed. Next slide, please. So, like I said, the goal here is maybe to lay out a few key concepts and stay away maybe from some specific technical legal definitions because I think it's relevant to understanding how the system works as a whole, because certain things, such as, we'll talk about the manner of entry and someone's immigration status, they're going to be really determinative of a lot of situations, not only what options people have to move forward to a more permanent status, but also maybe what level of support and access to benefits they will have initially. So manner of entry is important. Like I said, it's relevant to all immigration situations and all immigration cases. And this is a way of discussing how a non-citizen came to be present in the United States. So, I think initially that seems like that should be a very simple and straightforward thing, but there's really a lot of considerations that people often don't realize, right? I think we can say, okay, someone came to be here. It's very clearly it's a date, time, and a location thing, right? How did they enter the United States? But because our system is somewhat unpredictable at times, there's a lot of other things that can affect and will have long-lasting effects on someone's ability to obtain permanent status. So their mode of travel, other travelers that they might be with, whether those are family members or minor children, what documentation they have at their time of entry and what limitations it might have, and then the actual interactions that they have with U.S. immigration officials, and I would say even sometimes specifically who that official is, right? And unfortunately, how their day is going, and a number of other things that really can be less related to the law than anything else. And so up on the slide here are a few examples, I would say, of some of the more common ways that people enter the United States, just so you can sort of frame a little bit more some of these situations, right? So I think the first one is the most straightforward and probably what people are most common or can have the most experience with. It would be as if you're traveling to another country and you're going through an airport, right? Everybody is coming with a visa. Generally, they're going to go through some sort of inspection with an immigration official, a customs agent, and then they're going to get a stamp of admission, right? You continue on and enjoy your time in that country, right? So that is one of the more straightforward and familiar areas or ways to enter a country as a non-citizen. But obviously, we have a lot of different ways and a lot of different ports of entry that people can choose to enter. So the next one, which I think is probably top of a lot of people's minds, would be those individuals who are coming to a port of entry along the southern border. It doesn't have to be the southern border, but that's just where we see probably the most coverage in the news. So people who are coming to the border, they do not have a visa in advance. They haven't gotten that authorization to enter at the time that they arrive at the visa at a port of entry. And they come for varying reasons, but oftentimes right now we're seeing a lot of people who are coming to the U.S. border to seek asylum. Again, another specific form of legal relief that will be explained later on. At that time, they present themselves to immigration officials, typically U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, and they will go through some sort of processing and inspection. That inspection is really just an accounting for their personal information and purposes that they're coming to the United States for. And oftentimes people will be determined, they're not going to be formally admitted, but they are going to be given a temporary status that will allow them to pursue asylum. Right? So oftentimes that is people who are released with temporary status of parole, hopefully. Other times that could lead to further detention. We do have a very large immigration detention system in the United States, one that holds adults as well as families and children. So depending, again, on some of the circumstances and where you're entering, when you're entering, who you're speaking with, who you're with, that could lead to further detention. And then we also would have people who sometimes will enter without a visa, right? So similar to someone who's coming to the border, maybe to seek asylum, they didn't have any sort of permission or authorization to enter at that time that they arrive. And sometimes they're not apprehended. They do not encounter immigration officials. They don't present themselves to immigration officials. So they're able just to enter the United States, right? Oftentimes, these would be people who I think would primarily be labeled or described as undocumented, which just means, that at that time when they came and they have yet to maybe obtain any sort of status or permanent authorization to remain in the United States. Another reason why I think this is important, I think a lot of people, they'll have different ideas about, well, if someone was, inspected and they talk to an immigration official at the border, then that means that they must have some sort of pathway to permanent status, or they might have already a permanent status. And that's just not always the case. I think part of this presentation in general, one of the goals is to reiterate that everybody's situation is going to be very fact specific and very, very different. And so we can't take, we don't want to make assumptions necessarily about what, a small piece of their immigration history, the implications that that has for them now. And it also, another important piece is that not all encounters with Border Patrol or U.S. immigration officials is going to lead to an admission, right? Admission is something that will be more permanent, right? And that means that that person can stay and they have, they've been lawfully admitted into the United States on a permanent basis. That's not always going to be something that will be the result of a short border encounter and process. Okay, next slide, please. The next concept that I think is worth exploring is the idea of immigration status. And so here are some broader categories, I would say, of immigration status. And these are going to be, real throughout the presentation, and we'll get into a lot more detail about each of them as the weeks go on. But I think a few ideas to keep in mind when discussing these, and I think some things to keep in mind that are really, really useful when exploring any immigration status, the idea of intention and the idea of permanency. A lot of these categories and sort of general groups are created and defined based on the intentions of someone coming to the United States. And then also they're generally limited, I guess there's limited sense of permanency with all of them as well, right? So when we talk generally about immigration, right, or immigrant status or permanent immigration status, the intention is often someone who is coming here and intends to reside permanently in the United States, right? They're intending to go through a process to achieve some sort of stability and permanency here in the United States. We also have non-immigrant statuses and non-immigrant visas, where the intention is not to come to the United States and remain here permanently, but the intention is to come for a very short time, right? So it's limited in scope, it's limited in time. Something like a tourist visa, a student visa, certain professional positions, right, where you can get a visa for a temporary basis. The other, and then other ones as we go through, such as humanitarian based statuses, such as asylum. Those are when people are coming, they do have an intention, right, of coming and finding some sort of permanent status. Before they can achieve that permanent status, they have to go through a bit more of a process to verify that those are true intentions. But then they can lead to, yes, more permanent and stable status. So all of this is to say, that one, that these are important concepts to think about, and that these statuses can change over time. Someone might come with a temporary status and maybe with a separate intention, but there are events that could happen abroad, events that can happen here in the United States that can alter their intentions and the need maybe to pursue a new status. People can also come with one status and then unfortunately fall out of that status, right, because of maybe non-compliance or sort of not following a certain process for renewal. So the thing that I think is difficult about our immigration system is it doesn't necessarily create a lot of options for when there are these changed circumstances, right? It is very kind of linear in its thinking and saying, like, this is an intention and this is how someone would have to go about. And it kind of makes very limited options. You have to follow a very specific process in order and in very explicit way in order to achieve one of these statuses. And there's not a lot of accommodations for when real world circumstances interrupt that or force someone to change trajectory. Quickly, I also just want to touch on the term of migrant, because that's one that is also being used quite frequently. And I think kind of gets generalized and thrown around, and some of these other terms get mixed in as well. But I mean, just generally, we're talking about someone who moves away from their place of origin or residence, and whether that ends up being into another country or across an international border, whether it's temporary or permanently, and it can be for a number of reasons. So I think it's just important almost to say that we can't always subscribe any sort of or assume any sort of intention, right? It's a very general term, but I think sometimes it can come loaded with a lot of assumptions about what people are truly intending to do or what caused them to leave. Go to the next slide, please. Right. This is another set of terms, that I think is important to distinguish between, because they are very often used interchangeably, whether that's in common everyday conversations or within the media. But it's important to understand both of these and some of the realities that come with these distinctions. So, someone will qualify as an asylee or a refugee if they can meet sort of this definition that's listed at the top. This a form of protection that is for people who are unable to return to their country of origin, essentially due to fear of being persecuted on account of one of these protected characteristics or protected grounds: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. So that's the definition that both groups, whether they're asylees or refugees, have to meet. And they go through a very, very rigorous process, both groups, in order to determine whether or not they are eligible under that definition. The main difference is in the process. So for asylees, that is a determination that is given once someone is inside the United States. That is not a protection or a designation that is that someone can request before they enter the United States. They must come to the United States and to request asylum. They must present themselves in order to initiate that process. Whereas refugees is a status that is given outside of the United States, always in a third country from where that individual is initially from. But yes, it is a process. So once people are arriving, when they're arriving as a refugee, they have that status. They do not have to continue to do anything to prove that status or petition for that status. They have gone through all of this processing. And so you can see here, there's an intense amount of screening through multiple agencies, through multiple entities, in order to not only make sure that people meet the requirements for these protected grounds, but also that they go through any essential health or national security screenings and things like that. I think the other primary difference that should be highlighted is sort of the level of assistance and access to benefits that these two groups will have. So a refugee who enters the United States with this determination that they deserve protection, they are going to enter the US and they are immediately eligible to access federal and state benefits, as well as assistance from resettlement agencies, right, who really help with all different aspects of setting up a new life in a new country and integrating themselves into community. Folks who are coming here just to seek asylum, right, they are arriving and are in this process, which will be years. They do not have that same access to assistance, and they often do not qualify for a lot of the funding through resettlement agencies and other nonprofit legal providers. So they are really doing a lot of things and going through very difficult processes with limited benefits and limited support. Next slide. Okay. So very quickly, to reiterate some of the reasons why I think all of these concepts are important. The first is just that every person's facts and history and path forward is going to be different, right? And it's going to be maybe based on how they entered, the reason they came to the United States, relationships that they might have with other family members here, a number of things. But it makes it very, very difficult to give generalized advice. It makes it absolutely necessary that people are getting kind of case specific and research informed guidance about their legal process. And it also creates a lot of barriers to getting in line. Like I said, a lot of categories are designed with envisioning people following a very specific order and a very specific process. And it doesn't make it easy always to alter that process or switch between and apply for other forms of relief very often. Again, also people will have varying access to benefits and support in the United States, varying access to what we would say are essential human rights and constitutional rights, such as access to counsel. And we often see how the immigration system affords those benefits and rights to certain groups and not others. And then also, I think the reality of people's situations, right, based on their status, based on sort of this access to benefits and timeline for moving through in a process, it really is going to alter a lot of their personal life. The sense of security they feel, stability that they have in their lives, and also chances of being reunited with family members who might still be in a very dangerous situation in their countries of origin. Okay, and with that, I can pass it over to Nick, who will get into more of the details about the system.
Hey, everybody. My name is Nick Pierce. I am legal counsel, immigration counsel to Muslim Youth for Positive Impact. And we also work in the area of humanitarian immigration law primarily, family immigration as well. Don't refer anybody to us because we got way too many people to begin with. So let's restate our thesis here for a second. So one of the reasons why we're reviewing all of this is to answer the question, why don't people just do this the legal way? Why don't people just do it the right way? And that's what we're going to look at right now. One misnomer we have to deal with, one misconception we have, is that there is not one single regulatory agency or federal body or governmental institution that handles immigration law. There are, in fact, quite a few agencies, and we're going to look at that in a moment at the federal level. Congress, the president, executive agencies that interpret the law as it's passed and apply the law as it's passed, and then state, federal, and immigration courts that interpret that law. A couple of examples of this, my friend Wes was just talking about refugees, the difference between asylees and refugees. So one example of this is that the executive, the president of the United States, with congressional authorization, sets the number of refugees that the United States takes every year. So that number fluctuates wildly based off of the politics of the moment. During the Trump administration, I think at one point we got down to something like 10,000 refugee admissions a year, lawful refugee admissions a year. The Biden administration maintained that policy for 6 or 8 months of Joe Biden's tenure as president, and I think we're back up to over 100,000 a year refugee admissions. And again, those are people who are determined to be refugees outside of the United States and who come here with the assistance of the United Nations primarily. Let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So here we have our confusing web of agencies that are involved in this process. You can see in green right there, Health and Human Services and the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So that's the federal body that actually facilitates the entry of that 10 to 100,000 refugees who come in. But there are a bunch of other agencies that interact with our clients. One organization that we deal with frequently is the Department of Justice. That is where the Executive Office of Immigration Review is housed. And that is what a lot of immigration lawyers refer to as the deportation court. So we have a deportation court here in Denver. There's one in Aurora as well. And that's where basically a lot of the folks you see at the border who are entering in those other statuses or without admission or with parole, that's where they're going to have their cases heard in front of an immigration judge, very often from inside of an immigration detention facility. The decisions of those judges are reviewed by an appeals court. That's the Board of Immigration Appeals. They're kind of like the Supreme Court for immigration, and they are also under the DOJ. What a lot of people think of as the traditional immigration service, the successor to the INS, is USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's housed under the Department of Homeland Security. And you can see that they are not alone there. Those are the folks who will adjudicate your citizenship application. They're also the folks who facilitate a lot of those non-immigrant statuses. So if you're going to come here to go to Disney World, if you're in France and you want to go to Disney World, you might apply for a tourist visa, and it would be USCIS that would handle that as well. So USCIS handles things like green card applications, citizenship, and there are always exceptions to these rules. Sometimes the immigration judges can do it. Sometimes USCIS has to do it. It's a confusing mess. In addition to that, we have our friends at Immigration Enforcement. So that's ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement. Those are the guys who, kick down the door and check everybody's papers at your local taqueria. You also have the Customs and Border Protection. Those are the folks who you see at airports or other ports of entry. They do immigration inspections, but also customs inspections. Interesting fact about CBP, they're one of the only departments of government that is self-funding. That comes from the sale of items that they seize in the course of those inspections, and they have a very prominent role in the immigration system as well. It might surprise you to learn that our friends at the Department of Labor are here because they do what's called basically foreign labor certifications. And we're going to get to that in a moment when we start talking about the complexity of these lawful pathways. And then we have the Department of State, of course, who runs our consulates and embassies in other countries. And if you are applying to come, if you're doing this process, you want to come on one of those visas, they're very often begun. The first half of that process is begun at a consulate where you might be interviewed. So if you want to come as a student or a tourist or under one of those other programs or through some kind of a reunification pathway in humanitarian immigration law, you're going to do that at a foreign consulate. All right, there's one institution that I wanted to mention too that's not represented on our little bubbles here, and that's the state governments of the 50 states. So the state governments, while not able to legislate immigration directly, though the state of Texas frequently wants to throw that idea into contention, although the states cannot directly deal in immigration, they do frequently interact around kind of the edges. So the state of Colorado, for instance, a number of years ago, passed a law lowering all misdemeanor offenses to 364 days a year as the maximum penalty for misdemeanor offenses instead of 1 year because of federal immigration law. If it's 365 days or more, that would put the crime in a category that much more often results in deportation. So the state of Colorado made a decision at the legislative level to make things easier for immigrants here by making sure that minor criminal convictions won't result in deportation, although there are, of course, exceptions to that. When it comes to violent crimes, crimes of domestic violence, there are exceptions to that 364-day rule, whereas a state like Texas, I love beating up on Texas, is intentionally ensuring that their misdemeanor offenses are going to be above that threshold so as to make sure more people can be deported. Let's go to our next slide. Probably talking too fast, guys. You got to forgive me. I'm trying to cover a lot of material. Tell me to slow down if I need to slow down there in that little chat box. All right. So here are some broad categories of lawful immigration. All right. We see that family sponsorship category. We're going to look at that some more in a moment. But that's if you're a U.S. citizen and in some cases a green card holder, there are certain family members that you can sponsor to join you in the United States. And we're going to see why that is often a much overstated pathway to coming to the United States. The next is the employment sponsorship category. what's important to understand about the employment sponsorship category, and I have this conversation with my clients all the time, is that it is not the immigrant who can initiate this process. It's the employer who initiates this process, and it is only the employer who can initiate this process. That kind of takes us back to that labor certification we were talking about. This is often much more complex than people understand. For most employment-based pathways, the Department of Labor must certify, while working with the employer, that this job has been offered to an American for a certain amount of time, that the benefits and the salary have been posted to publicly accessible fora where an American can go and see. So there's a lot of regulations in the employment space that are very oriented towards ensuring that Americans always get the first bite at the apple when it comes to a job in the United States. Nevertheless, we have an employment shortage. And so there are a lot of circumstances in which companies may want to sponsor somebody to come because there simply aren't enough Americans willing to do that job at that price. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Our next category is humanitarian. That's going to be the topic of a whole other one of these mini lectures. But the takeaway I want to give you guys from humanitarian pathways is that virtually none of these pathways can be applied for from outside of the United States, with the exception of humanitarian parole. Now, approximately 95% of humanitarian parole applications are denied. Now, the Biden administration has been tinkering with humanitarian parole. They've changed some of the requirements. And in fact, they have incentivized parole applications to come from within the United States. So these days, generally, the people making a humanitarian parole application are family members of people in trouble in other countries. And even still, again, about 95% of those are denied. And all of us, oh, man, I didn't realize I had so little time. Sorry, Mick. Last one is other. That's diversity visas, other kinds of parole, tourist, business, and investment. In true American fashion, you can always kind of buy your way in if you have over $1.2 million. Let's do the next slide. Let's do another slide. I'm going to talk even faster. So these are the 4 categories of family members who can come very quickly. Unmarried sons and daughters over the age of 21, that's the F1 category. F3 category, married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. F4, brothers and sisters. Let's go to the next slide so I can show everybody what we're actually talking about here. I'm going to give you guys one example because we're running out of time. I had like 4 or 5 on deck, but let's do one big example to help disabuse us of some of our notions. The F4 category is for the brothers and sisters of United States citizens. So if you wanted to sponsor your brother and sister to come to the United States on a green card and then wait 5 years and apply for citizenship, you would fall into that category. Right now, if you're from any other country but the 4 listed on the right, the U.S. government's reviewing applications from 2007. So that's what, I'm bad at math, guys, a 17-year wait. So you could apply today if you were a U.S. citizen born in, let's say, Nicaragua, and you wanted to apply for your brother and sister. You would have to wait 17 years for that visa to be approved, another 1.5 years for the paperwork to be completed. They would then travel here, receive their green card, and then they would have to wait 5 years for citizenship. So you're looking at about 27 to 30 years to bring that sibling and get them to a point where they could vote in a U.S. election. The times, of course, are much longer if you're from some of these other overrepresented countries like Mexico, the Philippines, and India. Let's get another slide. Let's get another slide. You guys can see when you look at that one, the previous slide, that it's also similarly lengthy wait times for adult children of U.S. citizens. It's about a 14, 15-year wait. On the employment side here, you can see some of our broad categories. We have things like priority workers, skilled workers, special immigrants, employment creators. Let's go to our next slide so we can break down some of these categories further. And you can see here that even with employer sponsors, in our other worker categories, our fourth tier worker categories, we're looking at 4 and 5 year waits. And only between 15 and 20% of these employer-based applications are granted every year. And there's some really interesting ones that kind of fit under the employment rubric. And I want to bring up a couple of examples of give you guys an idea of how difficult this process can be. There's something called an extraordinary ability visa. I once represented a woman who was a 3-time placer in the top 6 finishers of the Tour de France in the female cyclist category. She had applied for an extraordinary ability visa to join the U.S. cycling team, and her case was ultimately granted. But you gotta almost win the Tour de France 3 times if you want to get a visa for being a real good cycler. Former President Donald Trump's wife, no politics here, no judgment here. I'm an immigration lawyer. Our former First Lady Melania was determined to be in the top 10% of runway models. And so she got in on an extraordinary ability visa as well. Good for her. Let's go to the next slide. Let's do another slide. We already kind of talked about this, but again, the most important thing I want you guys to get today, if you want to learn more, come back on those dates listed on your screen, is that there's basically no way to do this from outside the United States. That's why you see a lot of people at the border. Let's do another slide. I think this might be our last one, huh? So this, again, are other immigration pathways. There's the diversity visa, a small number of people from countries that don't often provide immigrants to the United States are granted a diversity visa. It's about 50,000 every year divided among like 90 countries. So you might have 1,000 or 2 for Morocco, 1,000 or 2 for Kazakhstan. And this is the diversity visa program. Tourist visas, B2. Again, these visas don't necessarily lead to a lawful pathway. Tourist visas don't. This is, you're making an explicit agreement with the US government that you're not going to stay here when you apply for a tourist visa. You're coming to go skiing in Aspen, and I guess you guys could probably guess how many folks from El Salvador get allowed to come to go skiing or to go to Disney World or anything like that. Parole is a humanitarian option, as I explained before, often filed for by family members in the US for people who are outside. It's one of the only kinds of humanitarian pathways that can be sought outside the United States. And it can often be sought at the border itself, which is, again, one of the reasons you see people stack up at the border. Is you show up at the border, you request an interview, you might have to wait in Matamoros or Tijuana for 4 or 5 months to meet with CBP. And then you tell them, hey, my life is in danger. And there's quite a lot of law governing what counts as danger and what does not. Let's see. And again, under that same, I wanted to mention the buy your way in process. If you have $1.2 million, you can start a business in the United States so long as you can show that it's going to employ 10 or more US citizens. You can basically kind of buy your way in too. It's $800,000 if you're willing to go to Mississippi or Alabama. I'm from Louisiana, so I'm not throwing any shade at my friends down south. Guys, I think that might be all of my slides. I talked really fast. Back to you, Tracy Harper.
Hey everyone, I am going to wrap us up today talking about who is authorized to provide legal services in Colorado. Just a quick overview on this topic. This is a topic that I spent a lot of time on in my professional practice, as well as outside of my professional practice, working with the state of Colorado, the city of Denver. I think it's just really important that everyone understands that immigration is an area of law and only certain people can provide these services. And so today I'm going to talk to you about who can provide services. Next week, I will talk to you about what is considered legal services and legal advice. And then our third session, I'll talk to you guys about sort of the penalties for providing legal services when you're not authorized. As well as some of the real life examples I've seen of things gone wrong, people who are either, bad actors or well-meaning good actors providing legal advice. So stay tuned for those two. But for today, I'm going to talk to you guys about who can provide legal advice and legal services. So here in Colorado, only licensed attorneys and Department of Justice accredited individuals working at accredited nonprofits can give legal advice. As far as attorneys go, the Colorado Supreme Court is our licensing agency. And so to become a licensed attorney in Colorado, you have to attend and graduate from an accredited law school, which costs somewhere around $150,000 to $200,000. Many of us never pay off those loans. Then twice a year, you have the option to sit for a practical exam. It's 2 days, one of which is all multiple choice questions. The other ones are more practical. And then you have to prove that you have the character and fitness and understanding of professional ethics to practice law. There's a whole separate course load as well as a different standardized test that you have to take. And it is by far the most onerous application I've ever had to fill out in my professional life. We go to the next slide, please. And then the other sort of category of people that can provide legal services are what we call DOJ accredited individuals. To get DOJ stands for the Department of Justice. That is where our immigration court system is situated. This agency answers to the President of the United States. And so they have executed regulations that govern who can become accredited and how that process works. And so only an employee of a nonprofit organization is able to do this. You can't just be like, hey, I want to get accredited so I can give legal advice. That's not okay. That's not allowed. There's no process to do that. And so the first step is for the nonprofit organization that provides legal services to apply with the Department of Justice, Executive Office of Immigration Review. Once that organization has become accredited, employees of the organization can apply to be accredited under that accreditation. Both of these applications require training, expertise, institutional policies. The Department of Justice wants to make sure that this is as close as possible to the sort of self-regulating that you see with the legal profession, so that clients who are harmed are able to get accountability for mistakes the same as they would with a licensed attorney. Both of these accreditations and recognitions require periodic renewal. I believe it's every 6 years for the nonprofit, and I don't remember what it is for the individual. Accreditation is not transferable. So someone here at Catholic Charities who is accredited to provide legal services couldn't just transfer over to International Rescue Committee with that accreditation. If you move from one nonprofit to another, you have to apply again to become accredited under that organization's recognition. Let's see. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. Oh, yeah. So that concludes the information for today. I encourage you all to put your questions in the chat, and I'm going to try my best to get them answered where possible. Let's see.
I see, Tracy, a question about fiance visas. Can I
go for it?
Yeah,
It's
cool.
all yours.
So yeah, fiance visa is a type of visa that is not represented on that family preference category. That's marriage visas. The fiance visa that you are maybe familiar with from 90 Day Fiance, it's one of my wife's favorites, ironically, has a lot of pretty strict requirements. They take about a year to process, in my experience, more than that. One of the important requirements of a fiance visa, they're not capped, and they're generally only available to U.S. citizens and LPRs, green card holders. They are only available to those two categories. You must meet your fiance in person. You must meet them in person and provide proof that you met them in person. And there are also screening questions on that application for fiancés that are sought through agencies. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's an I-29K, 129K is the fiance visa. And it does have that requirement that you be officially married within 90 days of your entry into the United States on that visa type. And you must submit proof of that marriage to USCIS once you're here.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to take the next two questions. They're both about the accreditation process. The first one asks, are law offices accredited nonprofits? No, they are not. A law office is a private business. Every lawyer in the firm needs to be licensed to practice law. Places like Catholic Charities of Denver and some of our other nonprofit organizations that have legal service providers, those lawyers still have to be licensed and they have to apply to be recognized in order to get nonprofit staff who are not attorneys to become accredited. It is extremely complicated and time-consuming and expensive. And then the other question, let's see, was about someone who is accredited previously working at a nonprofit. Can they help people fill out immigration applications? The answer is no. When you leave the organization, you are no longer authorized to practice law. You cannot give out legal advice. You cannot fill out applications, and doing so is considered unauthorized practice of law. That does not make you licensed to give out legal advice anytime and anywhere. Let's see what else. Someone has asked if there's a list of organizations. We'll be sending that out. Hopefully sometime this week, we'll have a list of organizations that do this work that you guys can share with your clients.
Tracy, can I answer this one about from our primary care provider here, Jess?
I don't think that is within the scope of our presentation here today. That looks case specific to me. So I would advise against it. Anything about a specific family or client, you guys need to talk to lawyers in their offices. We don't have the malpractice insurance. We're not here to do that here today, giving overviews. So I'm going to say no, Nick. Let's see what else. What else can we answer? There's a question about work authorization for asylum. I think we'll be covering that next week. We're going to be talking in detail about asylum and refugee status and several other humanitarian pathways. So I think we should hold off on that one until next week. I have a question about what is legal advice? That's next week's presentation. So tune in next week and you'll get some information about that. The question about why it's so hard to find pro bono or low bono lawyers, because there aren't very many of us, and we can't all help everyone. So that's just, it's a product of the system. There is more need than there is capacity to meet the need. And so those of us who are legal service providers and nonprofit organizations, we're restricted by funding, we're restricted by capacity, and we just can't meet the need of everybody. I have a question about a visitor's visa. Again, that's a case-specific question. You need to talk to a lawyer in their office in order to get an answer to that question. I don't know anything about these forms, so I don't. Change of venue, perhaps. They're using abbreviations. Again, case-specific questions. We're not here to provide legal advice. We're here to give you an overview so that you know when to send your clients to an immigration attorney for assistance. I think that is everything. Yeah, I think we've got everything answered. We have 5 minutes left if you want to type any more questions in the chat.